Up next in the broadcast, Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe accepts a proposal to reinterpret its constitution to beef up the military. Meanwhile, senior diplomats from Korea and Japan talk in Tokyo on Japan's sexual enslavement of Korean women during World War II. Prosecutors indict the captain of the ill-fated Sewol-ho ferry along with 3 of his crew members with involuntary manslaughter for leaving the ship without first evacuating hundreds of passengers on board. And in what may be a litmus test of the Park administration and a check on the nation's political mood, the June 4th local elections kicked into high gear as candidates officially registered for the ballot. Primetime News begins now.
Hello, everybody. This is Primetime News, and I am Kang Tae-ri.
Thanks for tuning in tonight. I'm Sean Lim. We begin with Japan's path towards militarization, which has the region on edge. Today, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe accepted a proposal to reinterpret his country's pacifist constitution.
The move opens the door for Tokyo to beef up its military. Some Asian countries condemned the move and questioned the true intentions. Kim Hyun-bin has our top story.
Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has set the wheels in motion for a revision to his nation's decade-long ban on the right to collective self-defense, signaling a potential change in the long-constrained post-war constitution. At a press conference Thursday, Abe said he had accepted a proposal released by a panel looking into the option. It calls for a drastic change to Japan's post-war security framework and would allow the country's military to come to an aid of a neighboring country under attack. In an effort to address concerns among Asian nations, Abe added that Japan will stick to a peaceful path, pledging that Japan should not again wage war. South Korea's foreign ministry urged Japan to use its powers for peaceful purposes, aimed at maintaining regional security, and emphasized that it needed to seek confirmation with Seoul on issues regarding the Korean peninsula.
Japan will only be able to influence security issues on the Korean peninsula upon our request.
To better deal with rising tensions with China and volatile North Korea, Abe's advisors urged the need for changes in its defense policy, which only allows minimum forces. In response, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Ho Chunying said that Japan has taken some unprecedented moves to increase its military might, and neighboring Asian countries have full reason to be highly vigilant over Tokyo's true intentions. Observers say Japan is eager to reinterpret its constitution to deter Chinese expansionism, especially in regards to a set of disputed islands known as Senkaku in Japan and Diaoyu in China. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
Senior diplomats from Korea and Japan held a second round of talks today in Tokyo on Japan's sexual enslavement of Korean women during World War II.
In a statement, Seoul's foreign ministry said the two sides held an in-depth discussion on ways to resolve the so-called comfort women issue, as well as other pending bilateral matters, but did not give further details. More than 200,000 women, mostly Korean, were forced to serve the Japanese military at comfort stations in the early 20th century. Tokyo claims the issue was settled through a 1965 treaty when the two countries normalized diplomatic ties, but Seoul is demanding an official apology from Japan and legal compensation for the so-called comfort women. The next meeting will take place in June in Seoul.
So a lot going on with Japan tonight, and Sean King from Park Strategist is joining us from New York tonight or morning for his time. Sean, thanks for making time for us, waking up for us today. Now, we were just talking about the Korea-Japan talks on the issue of comfort women today. Not much breakthrough as expected. They say they will meet again. Do you give much weight to these discussions, if at all?
No, I do not. And thanks for having me on. I think Japan is just paying Seoul lip service in this regard because President Obama has nudged Tokyo in this direction, and also because Japan wants to get relations back on track with South Korea to counter challenges from China and North Korea. But I don't expect Japan to really do anything because they consider this matter solved when relations were normalized in 1965. And if they were to give South Korea anything more on this, it would open the door to China asking for the same. Already, Japanese corporations in China are being sued by Chinese citizens for atrocities and enslavement during the Second World War. So they don't want to open a Pandora's box here. So no, don't expect much more from this.
So if Korea is to expect any progress, how should it play its cards now given that situation?
I would say it should keep leaning on the United States to lean on Japan. You know, we were all taken by surprise the fact that President Obama mentioned the comfort woman issue in Seoul, and I think our friends in Japan were surprised too. That's obviously evidence of proactive lobbying by the South Korean government before the trip. Maybe it was a quid pro quo to President Park for her to agree to the trilateral summit in The Hague in the first place. America is the only one Japan's going to listen to. So South Korea can yell all it wants to Japan. They'll probably ignore them. I would encourage South Korea to keep leaning on the U.S. to lean on Tokyo.
Now, another major issue is Japan's pursuit of collective self-defense. Is this a sign of worsening China-Japan relations?
Yes, and this is Japan reacting to Chinese violations of Japanese territorial sovereignty and integrity over the Senkaku Islands. South Koreans should not worry. This is not at all targeted at South Korea, and it's not amending the Constitution. That would require a two-thirds vote of both houses of Japanese government and a referendum, which is a very high threshold, so they're reinterpreting this article. And it's not saying that Japan itself is going to conduct military action. It's basically saying if the United States comes under fire from either Chinese or North Korean forces, Japan has the right to respond in defense of its U.S. allies. So this is not outward Japanese militarism, and it has nothing to do with South Korea. This is all about China and North Korea, China in particular.
So where does Korea fit in all this? No impact on Korea, you say?
No, if anything, it should strengthen South Korea's position because now North Korea should take Japan more seriously and the U.S. troops stationed in Japan, knowing that if North Korea were to ever attack U.S. forces in Japanese territory, Japan could respond. And again, with the consent of South Korea and United States, heaven forbid North Korea ever attacks South Korea again, Japanese forces could come to the assistance of their friends there. So if anything, this is a net gain for South Korea's security, but I doubt they'll see it that way because you know, they have a complex with Japan, understandably so given your history, but I don't see any negatives for South Korea here.
Well, let's talk really briefly about China versus Vietnam. We saw collisions of ships from both sides after China's installation of a deepwater oil rig in the South China Sea. How should Korea read China's moves, and should Seoul be worried despite the recent closeness between President Park and President Xi?
Yes, Seoul should be worried because remember, it was only a few months ago that Beijing put South Korean territory in one of its latest air identification zones. But I think there's such a love affair between Seoul and Beijing now, perhaps blinded by their shared hatred of Japan, that they can't see anything wrong that China does. They also think that China is going to somehow open up North Korea for them. Meanwhile, China's the reason Korea is still divided because it props up Pyongyang. So Korea should stand with other nations like the U.S., Philippines, Vietnam, even Indonesia now, against Chinese moves in the South China Sea. But sadly, I suspect Korea will be quiet.
All right, Sean, we got to go, but thanks for doing this. Have a good one.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Curry's comments came in response to
your gateway to the day's biggest stories in Korea and around the world. Breaking news, the hottest interviews, and a whole lot more. Join Arirang Sean Lim and Kang Che-ri from the heart of Seoul.
Begins now.
Primetime News, weeknights, live at 10 on Arirang TV.
A month has passed since the sinking of the Sewol-ho ferry, and the number of missing now stands at 20 as 3 more bodies have been recovered this afternoon. And in the criminal investigation, the captain and 3 senior crew members of the sunken ferry have been indicted on charges of involuntary manslaughter. Kwon So-ah reports.
State prosecutors on Thursday indicted Sewol-ho ferry captain Lee Jun-seok and 3 other crew members on charges of involuntary manslaughter. They say the four fled the ill-fated ferry without first evacuating hundreds of passengers on board and also calling them to remain in their cabins. Prosecutors say some of the crew confessed that they did not attempt to save passengers because they themselves wanted to survive. If found guilty, they could face a maximum penalty of life in prison or even the death penalty. At the Gwangju District Court in the south of the country, the prosecutors also indicted 11 other crew members for negligence of duty and violation of maritime law, which stipulates they should have been the last to leave the ship. Instead, they also escaped from the ferry as soon as they realized that water levels were rising. They are also accused of changing out of their uniforms during the rescue operation, making it difficult for the Coast Guard to distinguish them from passengers. Prosecutors are also putting more pressure on Yoo Byung-on, the practical owner of the Sewol-ho ferry's operator. He's been called in for questioning this Friday and is currently believed to be holed up inside a religious facility in Anseong, Gyeonggi-do province, where members of the so-called Salvation sect, which was founded by the Yoo family, are gathering in big numbers and blocking the gates to the facility. They made a statement in the afternoon denouncing authorities for associating their religion with the Sewol-ho tragedy and infringing upon their religious rights. They also questioned why the Coast Guard and their rescue response to the disaster are not being investigated. The sect has been under fire for weeks as it is accused of being involved in the Yoo family's wrongdoings and because some of the Sewol-ho crew are members of the cult. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
In a little under 3 weeks' time, Koreans will head to the polls to cast their ballots in the local elections. Campaigning is about to kick into high gear, but this election will be far less spirited as the country continues to mourn the hundreds of people who lost their lives in the ferry disaster. Kim Young-gil reports.
The ruling Saenuri Party's Election Management Committee held its first meeting on Thursday to discuss its strategy for the upcoming local elections. The committee's chairman Lee Wang-gu said campaigns under the Saenuri Party banner will be toned down this year in light of the Sewol-ho ferry tragedy.
The whole election process will focus on reinforcing the country's safety measures. Our election management committee will devise plans to help the families of Sewol-ho ferry disaster victims. Election campaigns will be carried out in the most humble way possible.
Candidates in the local races are registering this Thursday and Friday. The incumbent mayor of Incheon, Song Young-gil of the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy, was one of the first to show up at the National Election Commission headquarters in Incheon on Thursday morning to make his candidacy official. Saenuri lawmaker Nam Kyung-pil resigned from his seat on Thursday and announced he was running for the governorship of Gyeonggi-do province. All the candidates will be allowed to start campaigning next Thursday on May 22nd. For the first time in Korean local election history, people will be able to cast their ballots before voting day on June 4th. Early voting will be held on May 30th and the 31st. The outcome of the nationwide election is being regarded as a litmus test for the Park Geun-hye administration, which entered its second year in February. We will have to wait for the results on election day to see which political party earns the trust of the people to institute change. Kim Young-gil, Arirang News.
Down in Korea's port city of Busan, an international expo is underway to license and sell Korean media content around the world. Our Kim Ji-yeon is at the site and shows us how the deals being made now will affect what global viewers will eventually see on their screens.
From TV dramas and documentaries to animations, Asia's largest test market of broadcasting contents opened in Korea's southern port city of Busan on Thursday. The 8th International Busan Contents Market 2014 is being held under the theme of New Contents, New Network. Around 1,200 buyers and sellers registered in advance for the event. They're being joined by some 500 firms from more than 46 countries. Providers of broadcasting contents from Taiwan and Colombia are taking part in the international event for the first time.
For us, I think it's very important because it's growing a lot over the years. So it's not only like we meet with broadcasters from Korea, but we're meeting with broadcasters and producers from all over Asia. So for us, it's great. It's a great opportunity to kind of expand ourselves even more.
But this is about more than just business. Academic seminars on policies for mobile and ultra-high definition TV contents were held. Various experts and specialists shared their views on finding ways for broadcasting contents old and new to thrive in this new digital age. Korea's one and only English broadcasting station, Arirang TV, participated in the event, releasing its new program for the year. The 3-day event runs until Saturday. Kim Jian, Arirang News, Busan.
And speaking of big media spectacles, the stars are out in force in the south of France for the 67th Cannes Film Festival. But if you're hoping for a Korean film to take home an award, you may have to wait at least another 12 months. This is because none are in competition this year, raising questions about whether Korean films are losing some of their luster. Son Jong-in explains.
For the second year in a row, there will be no Korean movie in competition at the Cannes Film Festival. It's a disappointing turn of events as Korea had films competing in almost every other year dating back to 1998. Since Im Kwon-taek won Best Director at Cannes in 2000 for his film Chunhyang, movie directors have used the festival as a springboard onto the international stage, including Park Chan-wook, Hong Sang-soo, and Im Sang-soo. Some movie critics blame commercialism for the recent drought.
Movies that are planned as art films become commercialized when big companies get involved, and I think that may have had an effect.
Other critics argue that it's too early to undervalue Korean movies just because of their recent failure to enter the competition. They point to actress Chun Do-yeon being named a jury member at the festival as proof.
It is promising that Chun Do-yeon was selected as a panel member for the movie festival, following in the footsteps of directors Shin Sang-ho and Lee Chang-dong. It is the equivalent to 3 or 4 Korean movies competing at the festival.
Korean films weren't completely shut out of this year's festival. 4 Korean films, including A Girl at My Door, Target, and A Hard Day, have been invited to be screened in a separate non-competition category. It represents a big opportunity for the film's directors. And although Korea is out of the competition this year, local critics are hopeful that next year's festival will be different. This year's version runs through May 25th. Son Jong-in, Arirang News.
Riot police have clashed with angry protesters in several cities across Turkey as the government comes under fire in the wake of the worst mining accident in the country's history.
With more on that and other international stories, we now turn to Paul Yi, who's standing by at the news center. Paul, the death toll has soared a day after a coal mine collapsed due to an explosion in western Turkey. What's the latest on the rescue operation?
Well, rescuers are hunting desperately for the some 150 miners who are still missing and believed to be trapped underground. But hope is fading fast as any additional survivors at this point, as confirmed number of dead have reached 282. At the same time, we're seeing public outrage erupt against the government, with many blaming officials for ignoring safety concerns. Our Shin Se-min reports.
The Turkish government is facing mounting criticism over what has become the nation's deadliest mining disaster. Protests have broken out in parts of the country, with demonstrators voicing their anger over the government's failure to improve mine safety and Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan's move to privatize the mining sector. Police used tear gas and water cannons to disperse protesters in Istanbul who tried to march on the country's energy ministry. Turkey's major trade unions have joined in, calling a one-day strike. Prime Minister Erdogan, while visiting the accident site in Soma, tried to defend his government by pointing out that such disasters occur everywhere.
Such mine accidents do not happen only in Turkey. It happens in many countries, and many people died in such coal mine accidents. Our country is in a much better position.
The disaster has given fuel to an already outraged segment of the Turkish population, upset over corruption allegations surrounding the prime minister and those closest to him. The death toll from the mining accident has topped 270 and looks sure to rise even further. No survivors have surfaced since early Wednesday. Government officials say about 120 workers remain trapped in the mine some 2 kilometers underground. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
And turning to Thailand, where 3 people have been killed and 20 others injured in a deadly attack against anti-government protesters in the capital city of Bangkok. Police say the explosion occurred on Thursday at a protest site where hundreds of demonstrators were camped out near the city's Democracy Monument. Following the blast, witnesses say 4 gunmen opened fire on the crowd as they tried to flee. Authorities say it's the most serious incident since 5 people were killed back in February. Meanwhile, Thailand's acting prime minister was forced to flee from a meeting with the Election Commission after hundreds of protesters seeking to oust the caretaker government stormed an Air Force base. Despite strong opposition from civic groups, the government sees in a general election as the best way out of the current crisis. The World Health Organization says the recent outbreak of MERS virus is an increasing and serious concern, but does not yet consider it a global health emergency. Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, or MERS, is caused by a virus that stems from the same family as SARS. Symptoms include coughing and fever, which could lead to fatal pneumonia or even organ failure. The WHO says there's still no evidence of human-to-human transmission of the virus. They believe that contact with camels and poor infection control in hospitals are leading this new surge in MERS patients. The announcement comes after health authorities confirmed the first case of MERS in the Netherlands. More than 500 people have been infected by the virus, mostly in Saudi Arabia, while a handful of cases from Europe and the U.S. have also been reported. That wraps up our look at international stories making headlines around the world. I'll see you back here tomorrow night.
Hello and welcome to Primetime Sports. I'm Stephen Che. For many years now, South Korea has been at the pinnacle of archery, namely with the recurve bow. At the Archery World Cup's second stage in Medellin, Colombia, they showed us why. During the ranking round, Ju Hyun-jung scored a round best 679 points, followed by Lee Tuk-young with 678 and Chang Hae-jin with 675 to earn the 1, 2, and 3 seeds for the women. Combined, their score was 2,032, good for the new women's team world record. Many had not expected the result, with Olympic champ Ki Bo-bae and last year's World Cup winner Yoon Oh-ki sitting out of the event. Now for football and the Europa League finals. Sevilla defeated Benfica in a penalty shootout to lift their first European title in 7 years. Scores were level 0-0 in the first 90 minutes, sending it to extra time. And there, the two teams weren't able to capitalize, so it went to a dramatic penalty shootout, which Sevilla won 4-2. Now it's their third Europa League trophy, tying them with Juventus, Inter, and Liverpool for the most wins. And heading to the NBA playoffs, the Miami Heat and San Antonio Spurs defeated their opponents to advance to the conference finals. In the East, the Heat edged out the Nets 96-94 on the back of great scoring performances by LeBron James and Dwayne Wade. In the West, the Spurs took down the Blazers 104-82, despite star point guard Tony Parker leaving the game early with a hamstring injury. The preliminary tests came out negative, and he'll have a couple of days of rest until the next round. And leaving all of that there, let's get to Thursday's top KBO matchup. The Hanwha Eagles took a road trip to Daegu to face the Samsung Lions. Now it's the first inning, it's Hanwha's Kim Tae-gyun who brings home the first run off of his single. But we go all the way to the fourth, it's Samsung's Lee Seung-yup who hits his fourth homer of the year. It's a 2-run shot, it's 2-1 Lions. Now in the ninth, Samsung's closer Im Chang-young throws a wild pitch with the bases full, and Hanwha ties it up there 2-2, and it goes all the way to extra innings, and that's where it stands right now at the bottom of the 11th. And looking at the other games, Kia edges out NC 6-5, Lotte beats LG 9-4, and Tusan takes care of SK 10-1. And that's all I have for now. This has been Stephen Che. I'll see you back here later for more from the world of sports.
Well, the weather seems to be getting hotter by the day, and tomorrow is certainly no exception.
That's right. And for more on Friday's weather, let's turn to our Kim Bo-kyung at the Weather Center. Bo-kyung.
Guys, today we enjoyed bright and sunny conditions nationwide. In fact, parts of the southern region saw the mercury rise to around 30 degrees. At the moment, the nation is under the influence of a high pressure front that is moving from the west to the east near Shanghai. This is why we're seeing clear skies across the map. Now, tomorrow, the UV index will reach the very high level, mainly in both Jeollado provinces as well as Gyeongsang-do province. So make sure to apply some sunscreen before heading outdoors. This unseasonably hot weather should continue for a while, and keep in mind that there will be a big, about 10-degree gap in temperatures from day to night. As for Friday's readings, Seoul and Gwangju hit 27 degrees, while Daegu soars to a hot 30. Moving on to other places, Daejeon tops out at 28 degrees, Dokdo and Mount Kumgang reached 16. That's all the updates I have for you at this hour, but I'll be back with more after midnight.
And that wraps up this edition of Primetime News. Thanks for watching.
And good night to those of you in Asia. See you tomorrow.